Good evening. Thank you for joining me, and thank you for coming to listen to this presentation on Checkcard medicine. Something that's been an absolute passion of mine for the last 15, 16 years, and something which we've taken to some interesting places and done some interesting things with. And tonight's going to be a bit of a summary, really, of my journey in that sort of journey of discovery. And I hope that you can find some synergies with it, whether it be actually thinking about whether Checkcard medicine is right or appropriate for your environment, or whether thinking about Checkcards for anything are right and appropriate for your environment. So let's just start and have a wander through. I've had quite a few different lives, I suppose, is the best way to put it. I actually started life professionally as a physiotherapist and spent 20 years at a master's level practicing physiotherapy. But during that time, I dual qualified in paramedicine, but having never really worn green very much, I've worn orange in search and rescue my whole life. I then turned hobby into job, and I'll come back to hobby in a minute, and joined the RNLI full-time in 2005 as their clinical lead. And I was actually the RNLI's first clinical lead. Prior to that, the RNLI didn't have a dedicated member of staff to look after medicine. I looked after all coastal medicine around the coast of the UK for the RNLI, up to the 100 nautical miles SAR, the zone where you can go 100 nautical miles. And that was 238 lifeboat stations and around about 200 lifeguarded beaches at that time. The RNLI isn't the only maritime rescue service. There are also somewhere in the region currently of 70 independent lifeboats who also do a great job. And the RNLI making up around about 75% of the maritime rescue in the UK, and the independent lifeboats making up the other 25%. I spent a great 9 years with the RNLI, looking after their clinical medicine. And in 2014, I set myself up as my own little company, Saviour Medical, where I do now a mixed portfolio of work. Some of that is teaching at university. So I teach at something called a visiting fellow at Bournemouth University. So I teach the interesting parts of their paramedic science course, some of the more wilderness stuff, some of the more search and rescue stuff, some of the more trauma stuff, to paramedics of the future. I do lots of clinical governance work, and my most recent clinical governance portfolio piece has been taking the HM Coast Guard through its journey in clinical governance and updating all its clinical procedures. And we've just changed the whole casualty care course and standards for the Coast Guard Auxiliary Service, the Coast Guard rescue officers, the guys you'll see in the blue boiler suits with the blue and yellow Land Rovers. And you'll also now, in the next few months, see them popping out a rather lovely set of laminated Checkcards, which is their new way forwards. So yeah, that's cool. When I'm not doing that, I help other people sort out their maritime training needs and look at basically solving maritime problems. I also work for a very large American energy company looking at their UK clinical governance for all the medics we put in strange places, whether that be a medic we have to put on a vessel to go to Antarctica, or someone to go into a wind farm in the North Sea. But that's work. My lifeblood, my hobby has always been the RNLI, and I stepped onto a lifeboat station at the age of 16 and a half. You weren't in 1984 allowed to join until you were 17, so I had 6 months of washing waterproofs and making tea, and then I put in my application form at 17 with my parents' consent to join the lifeboat crew in Poole. And joined, and then had a period of years training and joined the crew properly in 1985 and served for 16 years at Poole, 1985 to 2001. Then had a couple of years break and then joined HM Coast Guard as a volunteer and served with the Poole Coast Rescue Team from 2003 to 2008. And then latterly joined Tower Lifeboat Station in London, which is an interesting lifeboat station. We'll come to that in a minute. And I've been there since 2012. So next year will be my 10th year there. And I also, when I have the seconds, volunteer for London Ambulance Service as well currently. So a really mixed portfolio of what I'm up to. But this has been my life, really. That's not a Poole lifeboat, I hasten to add, but it is an offshore lifeboat. And I spent a lot of time at Poole on both the inshore and the offshore. And most recently now at Tower Lifeboat Station. So the next time you're in London and you happen to be walking across Waterloo Bridge, look down onto the outbound side towards St Paul's, just underneath the shadow of Somerset House, and you will find Tower Lifeboat Station. Strange lifeboat station in the sense of it's a pier floating in the Thames, and it's Britain's busiest. When I tell you that the average for a coastal lifeboat is to launch less than 20 times a year, there are obviously some busy coastal stations that go out maybe 100 times a year, but there's some quiet coastal stations that might go out 3 or 4 times a year. Towers running average year in, year out is between 500 and 600 jobs a year. I was on 2 night shifts last week, and between the 2 night shifts and the 2 day shifts, we managed to launch on 9 occasions, which sometimes that's 48 hours for us. That could be a year's worth of work for a coastal station. So incredibly busy. And we deal with predominantly people. We're not doing classic lifeboat work here. We're not sort of towing in yachts and looking for kids on inflatable unicorns, which seems to be the, and stand-up paddleboards. They all seem to be the de facto jobs these days. But sadly, it is all people. About 50% of our jobs are people who are deliberately trying to end their lives by entering the Thames and the embankment or the bridges. And we do our best endeavours to stop them doing that. And the other 50% is usually anyone taken poorly on the river, be it on the transit system, the working system, the party boats, the pleasure boats, the scenic boats, etc. So a really interesting place to lifeboat. Sad enough to get wrapped up in, I was on shift for the London Bridge terror attack. Sorry, I beg your pardon, the Westminster Bridge terror attack on that rainy March afternoon. And we were the first unit on scene. Not a clue that it was a terror attack, but the first unit on scene, picking people out of the water who'd come off the bridge. And I wasn't there, but the lifeboat was also pretty much rapidly on scene for the London Bridge terror attack. So a very strange place to lifeboat. We have a lovely 50-knot jet boat, and we can reach our patch in 7 minutes in each direction. And for those of you who know London, we go from Waterloo Bridge inbound to Battersea Heliport and outbound to a mile east of the Thames flood barrier. And that's our patch. The station's manned 24/7, 365 by a crew. It's not a pager and assembly type setup. You actually, as a volunteer, turn up for a 12-hour shift, 7 to 7 days or 7 to 7 nights. Sit there, bells go, you go. And thankfully or not, depending which way you look at it, the bells go quite regularly. And this is our sort of classic job portfolio. Gentlemen, self-harm, entered the water from Blackfriars Bridge on a cold winter's morning. And this is us approaching. And you can see the bow, you can see the hand up. And this is the second, third frame, 6 seconds down the line. And that's oftentimes a target that we're aiming for in the tenders, top of a head, hand, or just subsurface. Anyway, that's a little bit about me. Let me wind the clock back. And we always maybe think about how things start in our lives. And this is where things started for me. This is me, age about 18, thinking about going on board a vessel in the English Channel for a gentleman who had been seriously squidged. That's the best way to put it, really, without going into too much glorious detail, between part of the cargo and him, the vessel structure. He's not in a good way at all. Now, in 1986, in that bag, there is some triangular bandages. There's some morphine left over from the Second World War. And I'm not joking. There is, not a lot of useful gear. We got a bottle of brandy on board, the world's supply of triangular bandages, and a dose of good luck. And my casualty care course was a 3-day first aid at work course delivered to me by the good people of St. John's ashore. And at the end of it, I said, well, how do I use the Entonox on the boat? Don't know about that. How do I use the morphine on the boat? Don't know about that. I know how to use the brandy, but, and off we go. So there I am, board the vessel, and no surprises, as a young man, my patient dies. And that always takes apart away a little bit of your soul. And you store that somewhere deep inside you, and you say, one day, hopefully I might change that, because those things just don't sit well with you. And when finally I was in a position to do something about it, years later, 20 years later, really, 2005, picking up the reins of RNLI Cas Care and desperate to make change, because I'd been that person for 20 years, even with a medical education, who looked at the guys around me just crashing and burning all the time. And the effect that that had on people, and it's just wrong. It's wrong to set people up to fail. It's just unfair. And so I sat there and I thought, let me just pull it apart and analyze why people stumble at the point of delivering first aid. And I came up with these things, and these were the things about my journey. These were the things that we identified in the RNLI in 2005. That the course we were actually teaching crew was not demonstrating latest best practice. It was too theoretical. It wasn't practical enough. There was too much emphasis on unachievable diagnosis. There were too many grey areas, not specific to the actual environment we're operating in, and it relied heavily on memory. Okay, well, let's just stop and pick up those one at a time. What do I mean by those? Of course, not demonstrating latest best practice. People get very stuck in paradigms and very stuck in historical syllabi. And I'm not scared to challenge. I never have been. It's sometimes not made me many friends, but I don't mind a challenge. And for example, if you now go off to the net, you will not find the reference that says you have to cool a burn for 20 minutes or cool a burn for 10 minutes. Yeah, cooling burns is really, really important, don't get me wrong. But no one actually did the piece of research that said it is 10 minutes or it is 20 minutes or it is 30 minutes. It's not done. And you just find that somewhere in a first aid book 100 years ago, someone sort of sucked their thumb and went, let's make it 10 minutes or let's make it 20 minutes. And everyone's just accepted it as you roll on from there. And these things become sort of historical paradigms. They come embedded in our psyche, embedded in the way that we do things. And how dare anyone challenge them? Well, how often do organizations, and I will point the finger at the RNLI, we weren't looking at our training syllabi. And what I mean by that is, we were still in 2005 having our courses delivered by St. John's. And St. John's is an awesome organization. I'm not bashing them one tiny bit. But what does St. John's know about going to sea? It's not their environment, it's not their field. It's not where they treat patients. So we were receiving a standard, very well delivered first aid at work course. Well, lifeboat medicine is not first aid at work. First aid at work, for example, the HSE first aid at work syllabus is written with the total core concept that you will receive professional help in 8 minutes. Now I'm talking to a load of people who get in a rib and go to sea. You're not getting help in 8 minutes. You are anything more than a mile off the coast. You're on your own. If the boat isn't moving and you're not coming towards shore, you're on your own for 25 minutes, at least. And people sort of think, oh yeah, it's okay. The lifeboat will be there really quickly. Well, please bear in mind the lifeboat has a KPI to launch in 15 minutes. So if the traffic's bad and the crew is short and they're getting hard to the station, they might be 15 minutes to get away, and then they've got to come to you based on the speed of the boat, 30 knots for an inshore, maybe 20 knots for an offshore. And you can do the maths. You're all mariners. You might think, oh, it's okay, we're going to have a rescue helicopter rapidly. There's only 10 of those around the coast of the UK. Bear in mind, they have a 15-minute stand-up time in the daytime. And if you happen to be diving in the dark after 10 p.m., they have a 45-minute stand-up. And then they've got their flight time to you. And there's only 10 of them. And if you happen to hit a zone that's right halfway equidistant between two stations, you can be a 45-minute flight time. So you could be looking at 45-minute flight time plus a 15-minute stand-up. You could be on your own for an hour. So it's crucial that your syllabi and what you're trained in and how you're trained matches the environment that you're actually going to work in. So as you'll understand, it's absolutely pointless taking a first aid at work course if you're going to go 2 miles off the coast of the UK, because it's useless to you. You're not going to get help within 8 minutes. The kit isn't going to work, and a soggy triangular bandage does no one any good at all. So my first thing for, what were we doing wrong in the RNLI was we weren't demonstrating latest best practice at all. We weren't up to date with medicine. We were full of historical paradigms. And why? Well, we had to take a look and look at our own operating environment and take that brave step of changing our syllabus. That's the first thing I'd say. Another bugbear of mine, and there's going to be a lot of soapbox tonight. I'm sorry about this, but there is going to be a lot of soapbox. No one ever does CPR better because they know the anatomy and physiology of the heart. Yet in a first aid at work syllabus, you're meant to teach the anatomy and physiology for 20 minutes. Why? You're going to forget it. If you're not medical, you're going to forget it in 6 weeks. Most teaching theory shows that you forget things quite quickly. And who wants all that Latin? Take that 20 minutes of that syllabus and spend 20 minutes doing CPR, because it's going to be 20 minutes whilst you're waiting for a lifeboat or a helicopter on a good day. So why not just completely spin that syllabus around and stop teaching people things they don't need to know and give them 20 minutes of muscle memory doing CPR so they actually understand what it's like to pump up and down somebody's chest for 20 minutes, which is heart destroying and biceps destroying. Okay. Another bugbear in a lot of ways that people get trained is too much emphasis on unachievable diagnosis, which we know breeds fear. So if you actually, if you're stood at the front, and again, it's one of those crazy paradigms. You get first aid instructors and they stand there and the class is sagely sucking their pencils and they're like, oh yes, well, this is a heart attack. You can definitely tell that. You can go up to your patient who's sat in the office next to the photocopier and say, you are having a heart attack. How the hell do you know that? Without an ECG for starters, without blood tests, how do you know that? You don't. How do you know it's not angina? How do you know it's not a thoracic spine pain? How do you know it's not indigestion, for God's sake? You don't. And so because these syllabi force people down these avenues of diagnosis, people get scared. And the more scared you get, the less you want to engage. Someone sent me I have lots of work reviewing people's courses. And I'm not joking, this was a slide from somebody's first aid at work course. Burr holes, cutting holes in people's head to relieve brain pressure. Why? Now, it was only an information slide. He obviously wasn't asking his candidates to cut people's heads open. But why even bother to tell them? It just trying to make the person at the front sound clever and put this teaching gradient to the student who sat there just confused. So let's actually get the information across that people need. And let's take away diagnosis. Let's basically treat people on what you find. Treat people on the fact that they're short of breath. I don't care why you're short of breath. You're short of breath. So I need to treat your short of breathness. Or you're unconscious. I don't care why you're unconscious because I can't fix it without any kit. So let's just worry about you being unconscious and what does that lead to? And as you all know from all your courses, unconsciousness leads to a loss of airway and a loss of airway leads to death. So, hey, why don't I just maintain your airway, keep you warm, and look after you whilst you're unconscious and deliver a live patient to the next level of care rather than fretting about the million things that could cause you to be unconscious and in the meantime not watching your airway and watching you die. Just thoughts. Delivery of courses. This was abysmal, and again, this is me poking the finger at the RNLI I inherited in 2005 and the training I inherited. Too many grey areas, too many people saying, well, it depends on the day. You can't have the luxury of grey as opposed to black or white unless you have a clinical education. So if you've gone off and done a 3-year degree in physio or nursing or paramedic science or a 5-year degree in medicine, and then all your clinical experience after that, you're entitled to grey because anyone who's actually a professional in it understands there's a hell of a lot of grey in medicine. But grey doesn't work for people taking a 3-day course or a 2-day course or a 1-day course because they don't have the benefit of that clinical education to fall back on. And the more grey the instructor makes it and the more Latin they put in, the more complicated it sounds, the more unachievable it sounds for the normal guy or girl sat in the class going, I just want to help. But he said the word tension pneumothorax, and I'm still thinking about tension pneumothorax or whatever that means, and I've missed all the information that came after about what the hell to do. So why do we do this? Why do we have this sort of teaching style? Why do we set people up to fail? Why do we train on carpet? Again, we were in the RNLI training on carpet. We don't treat people on carpet. We treat people upside down in gunnels and face down in the water and in rock crevices and God knows where. So take your course outside. You know, next time you're doing a course for BSAC and it's anything to do with CAS carrying a rib, get in a rib and do it. Find what the space is like. If you don't have the luxury of a rib, mock one up in the classroom with chairs. But don't give yourself 10 foot of floor space when you might only have 2 foot of floor space. Look at ways of actually putting yourself in the environment you're going to have to look after people in. The space constraints, the movement, the smells, all the things that might put you side left when you do it. That's the time to really start to get in, just embed yourself in the best simulation you can do within the training you can achieve. And finally, the big one, memory. Pretty much, unless someone's knocked on my door, every course that I know of, sub-professional level in the UK, relies on memory. It's one huge memory test. And that is so unfair. It's unfair because it just doesn't work for starters. And let me take just a few minutes to get really geeky with you. And those of you who are medically qualified might love this. Those of you who are not, I'm going to use some big geeky words, but just bear with me because I'll try and make sense of them as well. But I'm going to just take a quick delve into neuroanatomy and neurophysiology. So the anatomy and physiology, the working and structure of your brain. And actually, I'm going to hopefully pull the curtain back on something that you know. What I'm about to say, you'll understand. You'll say, oh, well, yeah, I've seen that happen before. That happened to me. You just might not know why it's happened. So when we learn something new, all that processing and learning is going on in the front of our brain, our prefrontal cortex. That's the posh name for it, the prefrontal cortex, but it's in here, all right? You know that because the first time you were taken out for a driving lesson, you were gripping the steering wheel and you were thinking hard and you were watching the road and you were shaking the things and you didn't quite get your feet right and you hit the curb a few times and etc., because it's all being learned at the front. It's probably very different from the journey you had home tonight if you were driving tonight, where you might have been drinking a drink, smoking a fag, changing the thing, playing with your phone, having a conversation or looking out the window. And you get home and go, I can't remember whether those traffic lights were red or not. They probably weren't. Why? Because as you've learned something, you then shift that learning, this procedural memory, how to change gear, how to do stuff, how to check your mirrors, all that stuff gets shifted from the front of your brain where you have to think about it into subcortical regions of your brain away from the front, freeing up the front. And because the front is now freed up, that's why you can drive home, have a chat on your hands-free, look out the window, change the buttons on your radio, think about other things, because driving the car has moved to a different part of your brain. You see this beautifully if you try to teach a child to ride a bike. You're holding the seat, they're pedaling, off they go. It's all prefrontal, and they're just about thinking about moving, and you take your hand off. They don't know you've taken your hand off, and they're actually cycling until they think about it, and it moves back from the places it's trying to get stored in the sort of procedural memory area of the brain back to the front. They go, oh my God, I can't cycle, and fall off their bike. And I'm sure if you've had kids, you've seen that a million times. But that's why it's shifting between different areas of your brain. Okay, why is this important? Procedural memory, how to do something, does not degrade when we are under threat, under duress. And you'll see that all the time in the military. You'll see people who know exactly how to, free their bolt and load their weapon and such like, bomb, 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 all mechanical actions. And the saddest thing I ever saw was a guy who spent 22 years in the military, and then a lot of times after that as a firearms instructor on an intensive care unit, in a coma, still doing his weapon drills. That's embedded in his brain. Procedural memory doesn't degrade under threat. But anything going on in the front here, your prefrontal cortex, does degrade when you're under threat. So the minute someone or something that you perceive to be a threat, this area can shut down. Okay. The problem is it's this area, a bit like the RAM in your computer, that accesses the back area. So if this one's shut down, you can't get to the procedural memory. It can't access the procedural memory and bring it forwards. And that is why people freeze. People who've been trained, they know what to do. This bit comes under duress. This shuts down. It's neurophysiology. There's nothing you can do about that. And you can't access the procedural memory until someone says, go and get me. Go and do. Please get. Put that in. And you'll see someone who's maybe been trained to put an airway in a million times, and they stood staring at the patient, totally frozen, until you go, put that airway in, and they go bang. And what you've done is you've skipped past the pre into their procedural. You've told them to do it. It's moved down. They pick up the airway and they put it in because they've got that muscle memory. They've got that procedural memory. So actually, when people are under duress, under what we call bandwidth, their brains don't work. So why the hell do we ask people to do first aid at bandwidth? Because by the very nature of first aid, it is not your profession. And that's why people who are medical professionals don't quite get Checkcards and don't quite get this, because they're like, well, but you're not scared. Only on your really, really bad patients are you scared. And therefore you can go from your frontal cortex into your learned memory. But Joe Public, who's not ever had to resuscitate someone or not ever seen a horrible hemorrhage or not had to deal with someone fitting who's chomped half their tongue away, they've not seen it before. So they're scared as anything. They've just taken a 3-day or 2-day course. They're now scared. This is shut down and they freeze and they become ineffective. That's how we decide to run all our lower pupil medicine sub-professional levels. It's bonkers. So if you put all that together, not all the stuff I've discussed, coupled with the massive relying on memory, you get this sum total of fear, avoidance, and ineffectiveness. And we saw it in the RNLI in 2005. We'd go to a station to offer them a first aid course. The actual thing that the station has to do is they have to put up 10 of their crew for a first aid course. We'd have 3 willing volunteers and 7 press ganged people who happened to be the last people in the room the night they were dishing out that you must go to the first aid course. And they hated it. Scared, avoiding, ineffective. So something had to change. We had to say, look, let's change this because it's not working. And actually, honestly, brutally honestly, are we really saving everyone that we say we're saving? No, we're not. Are people dying on our watch? Yes, they are. Why? Because we're first aiders who are failing. Okay. And if you push 100 miles off to look after someone with a 3-day first aid ticket, it's pretty damn unfair. So I didn't want that to happen to anyone else. That etched my soul. And so it's time to make change. So let's look left and right. Who else does what? Well, let's interestingly look at the aviation industry, because the aviation industry have nailed this. And medicine hasn't. Medicine is still quite aloof. Medicine is still quite, humans are amazing things and we'll do amazing things. And then when it goes wrong, we'll talk about it and work it out. The aviation industry is completely different. So the aviation industry starts with the viewpoint that humans make mistakes, full stop. Therefore, what systems can we build in to stop those humans making mistakes? Because if we could have the plane taking off, flying and landing by itself, brilliant, because it's not going to make a mistake unless it's a Windows computer and it goes blue. People are things that mess things up. And when they looked at airline accidents, the bulk of the time was human error rather than machinery failure or weather or whatever. So aviation is packed with check cards. You can't do anything. There's an amazing, lovely little video doing its rounds on YouTube of two pilots of a Dutch aircraft taking off from Geneva. And they take off and they turn over the mountains and they're heading up towards Holland, and one of their engines catches fire. Now, you'd imagine at the front it's like, but it's not. It's, the co-pilot sort of just registers the fire on the dashboard and says, yeah, engine fire number 1, whatever it is. Reaches behind them, pulls out this massive pack of fancy check cards. It's basically the Boeing 767 manual, all laminated, flicks through to fire and starts reading off a line. Just reads a line, the pilot does what he says. Reads off a line, the pilot does what he says. Slow time. Read a line, do it. Read a line, do it. Read a line, do it. Put out the mayday, put out the fire, turn around, land at Geneva. Everyone's happy. Didn't have to think. Had to reach for a book, turn it and read it. That was it. And that's where the aviation industry comes from. Yet we still insist in medicine of people sucking their finger and saying, well, I did a first aid course 2 years, 11 months and 22 days ago. I'm doing another one in 8 days' time and I can't remember a thing. So we put these into the RNLI. And this was one of the first sets. And then since then, it's grown arms and legs in the last, 10, 15 years, and is continuing to grow arms and legs. It's not a new idea, however. Airlines were already using check cards, military operations were using check cards. Some of the search and rescue stuff was done on check cards, search patterns, etc. In Marsat, on the bridges of every vessel, they've got check cards for search patterns. Hospital critical care was done on check cards. The ambulance service has a fancy set of protocols in its pocket. It's a thick book, but they're basically check cards called JR Calc, which tells them exactly what to do, when to do, and how to do it. And in a way, aren't diving tables and charts and things like that check cards? Is a buddy check. If you got it written down, is that a check card? So you don't forget. All important stuff. So it's not groundbreaking. It's not like amazing. It's just no one had actually done check cards specifically aimed at sub-professional levels of medicine. So we introduced these into the RNLI, and they were absolutely proven to take away the memory test. We noticed amazing changes in the level of care that were being given. Candidly, and I say honestly, I noticed an amazing change in the number of times I was going to coroner's court, brackets, wasn't going to coroner's court to defend actions of lifeboat crew. They certainly assisted people at bandwidth. They became an amazing tool to facilitate data collection for our patient records, because pre-2005, we weren't keeping any patient records, and we should have been. That allowed them to assist this magical beast called clinical governance, which is a bit like clinical health and safety, but don't worry about it. And it protected the staff, protected the volunteers, protected the organisation. A lovely quote from a lifeboat crew member. When I'm wearing the boxing gloves of panic, the check cards are a handrail I can grab. And I love that saying. The boxing gloves of panic, nothing works. You drop everything. You can't do a zip up. You can't get a bag out. You can't get stuff. You're in that bandwidth zone. And it's a handrail you can grab when you've got your boxing gloves on. So what does a check card look like? And this is where I can't do a Rowan Atkinson impersonation, but it's so much more than he says in there, if you recognize the reference to Love Actually, where he's like, it's so much more than a bag, sir. It's so much more than a card. The anatomy of an effective check card is a science in itself. And I was blessed to work with a gentleman who's now sadly left us, as in left the planet, bless him, who was an absolute expert in learning resources and understanding how learning resources have to be accessed. And we did a lot of work looking at how best to access the bandwidthed brain, made even more challenging by a statistic that most people won't know, But 5% of UK lifeboat crews, current UK lifeboat crews, are 100% illiterate. By that, they cannot read or write. And 25% of UK lifeboat crews have significant dyslexia. So that adds the compounding problem of, hey, you've got 3 days to teach these guys to keep someone alive for 100 miles, which is 5 hours in an offshore lifeboat, with 3 days work. And by the way, 5 out of 100 of them can't read or write, and 25 out of them struggle with reading. Oh, okay. Now you might say, well, what's the point of producing a check card with loads of words on it then? Well, it's about someone else being able to read it to them as well as them being able to read it. And we learned loads of things about the anatomy of a proper check card. So we learned stuff about the font size, the font type to use, the font color to use, font consistency. If you're flicking between cards to offer care in different arenas, if the font changes size and you're dyslexic, that destroys you. The print quality, crucial. The encapsulation quality, encapsulating things, not laminating things. Laminated things in water, they delaminate, water gets in and they go horrible. If you encapsulate something and you actually turn it into a solid piece of plastic, it's incredibly different. And I still have, I just regularly top the bucket up, a set of original RNLI 2005 check cards in a bucket of water in my garage because I'm sad. But I just want to see how long they last. And they're still there. So, you know, they need to be waterproof, rewritable, robust, cope with being in a pocket, pulled out of a pocket, ripped, etc., etc., etc. And then usable, so they need to be able to cope with night vision. They need to be concise. There can't be any grey in them. These are not a manual. When you are under duress and under bandwidth, the last thing you want to do is pull out a textbook because you'll not find the information you want. You'll not access it at speed and you'll not get through it. So this is about bump, 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 bump. It's a dial in to the procedural memory you already know. Whereas a textbook helps you learn that procedural memory in the first place. And they're very different tools. So let's show you what a set looks like. This is a set at a very basic first aid level that I did for John Lewis for their sailing club. And it takes them through their assessment, danger, impressions, life-threatening bleed, the cornerstone of modern stuff, airway, breathing, circulation, check their conscious state, keep them warm, blah, 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 step by step of a patient assessment, for example. And counting isn't everyone's big, you know, ability, especially when on bandwidth. So those matrices at the bottom of the second page is all about your 6 times table, because if you're checking someone's breathing for 10 seconds, and at the end of 10 seconds they breathe 6 times, sometimes 6 sixes escapes you when you're at bandwidth, whereas that matrix says, hey, 6 is 36 in a minute, 36 is red, it's bad news. All color coded, all referenced, all the work done for them. They go on and take, in this case, a subjective assessment, the normal sample assessment that you would have all the details that you'd like to ascertain from your patient. And then you'd see from there, you know, they monitor the patient whilst they're with them, looking at the simple stuff. Is their airway okay? Are they responsive? What's their breathing rate? What's their central cap refill? And what's their pulse rate? And then once they've assessed the patient and come up with a, yep, they're poorly or they're not poorly. And in lifeboat terms, it's known as big sick, little sick. And that was another little joy that we put into the RNLI. It sounds simple, but actually big sick, little sick, we clarify what big sick was. Big sick was a change in the physiological parameters of either their breathing rate, their pulse rate, or their conscious state. And a big sick patient is a time critical patient. Whereas a little sick patient who has a normal breathing rate, a normal conscious state, and a normal pulse rate is a non-time critical patient. And that made changes in extrication. That made changes in, you know, let's say a spinal injured patient in the bottom of a yacht who is big sick, well, they've got to be dug out of the yacht on a stretcher and sent off in an aircraft if the lifeboat's not fast enough. But a little sick patient, spinal patient, bottom of a yacht, keep them there, stabilize them, tow the whole yacht in, get alongside, let the whole fire service help you and the Coast Guards dig them out, slow time. So it can make really good evacuation decisions that I could stand and justify in court. Once they've made their decision as to what's wrong, not major any diagnoses, you'll see it's like fractures, chest, burns, spinal head, just simple stuff. And it takes them off to a different set of the cards. Red is your immediate lifesavers, green is your trauma or injured patients. Medical conditions are orange, hot, cold, wets are light blues. And any sort of, you know, abbreviations cards, or in this case, they had a radio procedure card and what should be in their kits, etc. Those silver cards. And you'll see the concept of the color coding. So the outside rims on those cards are the red, the green, the orange, and the blue, guiding people through the packs. They can buzz through the pack at speed, open it up. And if you watch Saving Lives at Sea, you'll see the crew get their pack out and start to go through it. It's just a variant of that. And they then head off to a card. So in this case, the resuscitation card, time critical, adult, child, and the protocols for them to work through. And the protocols are different for everybody depending on their training. Hence, there is no set of cards. I alter the cards for every organisation I put them into, because everyone's training is different and everyone's equipment is different. And a check card can only work if it matches exactly your training and equipment. And I thought you'd be interested in this one. This is actually from St Abbs Independent Lifeboat. They have a set of cards that I've done for them, and this is their diving one. So you can sort of see, that in their CAS care course, if they think the incident is diving related, a whole load of possible signs and symptoms they might be facing at the top. They carry Entonox, so a big warning never to give it. And then if the casualty is unconscious, what to do. And if the casualty is conscious, what to do. And then notes at the bottom, do not discontinue first aid even if the person's improved. You guys will know all of this from your diving. Keep diving equipment for examination. Evacuate dive computer. Bang, 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 bang. Memory test taken away. One step at a time. Do. Job done. And I'm really proud to say that we're heading towards the 500,000 successful patient interventions to date on this check card process. Just the templates that I've put into people's hands, which are now in the hands of over 25,000 responders in the UK. We just know it works. And I was really proud that they noticed it worked as well. And someone kindly did some maths in 2014, and there'd been a massive documented increase in survival courtesy of the RNLI interventions. And they put it down to the check cards and changes that we'd done clinically with the training and the cards and taking away the memory test. And I kindly had a trip to the palace and got given my OBE, which is a pretty special day. And I wear that for all the lifeboat crew who go out there and do stuff. But it was nice for someone actually to bother to do the maths and say, hey, this has made a massive change. Something that in your gut is working actually statistically works. Where are they? If you happen to bump into them, well, the RNLIs are using them. There's a lot of commercial pilots and commercial fishing vessels. A lot of the UK ports have their own set with that maritime pilots set of cards. A couple of fire services, PD ports, you'll see there. Independent lifeboats, a whole raft of different independent lifeboats, ambulance services, wilderness medicine societies, etc. And most recent set, as I say, we just completed the set for HM Coast Guard, as well as some Olympic coaches for the RWA and various other interesting people that are out there doing interesting medicine. So all I'll say about check cards to round off is they do, without doubt, produce confidence. They do produce competence. They do allow effective interventions to be done. They massively facilitate data collection, which then can be passed on to the person coming to take that care. They do help if you're in an organisation that needs clinical governance to give you that robust clinical governance. They're not that expensive, and boy, do they save lives. And that's my favourite scene from one of the fire services that I went to inspect, where they'd taken the check card PDF, blew it up, and no matter what you're doing or where you are, they're still learning. And that's my favourite shot. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing my passion, and happy to take any questions. I will come off the screen sharing so I can see your questions and talk to you face to face.